person beside you.
Hi, good evening. Welcome to the NAACP Candidates Forum. This one is for the primary election of the Republican auditors. Jake Lee and Brandon Meredith are on the ballot. The election will be March 17th. Early voting has already started. We have some ground rules. Only the press and one of our NAACP members take pictures. We ask that no recording devices. The library is recording the whole thing. You'll be able to go to KankakeePublicLibrary.com and see the whole thing. So please, no picture taking by the public or recording devices. Also, when you ask your questions, please, we collect the questions from the audience and then give them to our moderator, because oftentimes a lot of the questions are the same, and then he'll take them, the ones that's being most frequently asked, and ask them to the candidates. Also, questions will come from our panel. Ayanna Smith, the county auditor, Mike Rubel from WVLI, and Ann Delabray from the League of Women Voters. What did I say? So questions from the audience will come around. Mary has pencils and little cards for you. You write them on the card and we'll collect them. The questions have to be asked not specifically to one candidate. They have to be appropriate for both candidates to answer. Okay? Thank you so much.
Thank you. Each candidate would have a 2-minute opening and closing statement, and each would get 1 minute to respond from questions from the audience and questions from the panel. The timer and the moderator, timer for the evening is Ms. Paulette Crank, the secretary of the NACP. The moderator has the final authority in all matters of time limits. And just for a correction, Ms. Ayanna Smith is representing the Kankakee County Political Action Committee. So with that, we're going to start with Mr. Lee with a 2-minute opening statement, followed by Mr. Meredith.
Well, good evening to the NAACP. Thank you for hosting this event, and to everyone who gathered to be a part of this critical conversation regarding the Office of Auditor. For those of you who don't know me, I am Jake Lee, the current county auditor for Kankakee County. I grew up on the east side of the county in Hopkins Park, educated by Pembroke St. Anne School Districts and the Kankakee Area Career Center. I went on to serve our country in the United States Navy, from the Naval Academy to the USS Enterprise and the deserts of Afghanistan. Along the way, we collected a few degrees and, of course, have been working all of that time as well, and I also have 2 beautiful daughters. When I was elected in 2016, we approached the office with a philosophy that hadn't been seen in quite some time, and that was one of accountability. And increased accountability in the auditor's office is something that we attempted to bring, starting with the work we did by hiring a CPA. My chief deputy auditor is a CPA. We included the first auditor internship program, investing over 400 hours of professional education to future accountants. We included the first fraud taxpayer reporting hotline. We've done 18 community engagement forums, whether it was town hall meetings, fraud education and prevention forums, in order to inform the public as to what's going on in the auditor's office and to increase the transparency that had not existed in that office in the past. So it is our goal to continue to pursue all aspects of watching your tax dollars and watching the county spending to ensure that the government is operating on your behalf. With that, I look forward to your questions throughout the evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Meredith.
Thank you, Mr. Pace. Thank you for inviting me to the NAACP. I'm glad to have the opportunity to speak today. The first thing I wanted to talk about was how I got here in the first place. And the first thing was, I was sitting in my office one day having my morning cup of coffee and was rolling through my Facebook feed. And now I'm not a particular social media guru, but that day I happened to notice that the auditor's office and a couple of board members were having a debate. And for some reason I decided I wanted to weigh in. And I asked a few questions, and I heard insinuations of fraud and corruption, and that really genuinely bothered me. I asked the auditor about what facts and evidence he had to support his assertion, but he kind of avoided the question. And I thanked him for his elusive response, and again asked, where were the facts and evidence? And again, he didn't really provide any. So after about an hour of back and forth, I decided, hey, let's just agree to disagree, and I went about my day. But then something kind of strange happened. I went home, and my wife said, what have you done? And I kind of looked at her, and I was like, what do you mean? And she said, we had a friend call and said that you were running for Kankakee County Auditor. And I hadn't talked to her all day, so she actually wondered what the heck happened. So I kind of told her about it, and she said, well, what do you think? And I said, well, the auditor position might be the most boring job in the county. I mean, auditing is not real fun or anything like that, but, I'm an accountant, and I enjoy the mundane, a good vanilla ice cream cone, things like that. So I decided to call a couple good friends that I knew, one on the county board, and I asked him, I said, what's going on in the auditor's office? I said, I've gotten some phone calls, and people are asking me to run now, and I just put a post out on Facebook, and wow, everything changed from that moment. I decided that, hey, I need to step in and do something for the greater good of the community. And that's why I'm here today. Not because somebody asked me to do it, it's because I want to do it.
All right, thank you. Ms. Smith, you have the first question, and the question is to Mr. Meredith.
Mm-hmm.
Hello, good evening, gentlemen. The first question would be, the county auditor's office at times becomes... Sorry about that. The county auditor's office at times becomes a catch-all for politically driven proposals aimed at government accountability. What's your view of the office authority and its limits?
So you're asking me what the authority is for the auditor's office. And the authority is really to be the checks and balances on the county. It should be an independent office. Politics should never play a part in it. And it seems as though the office has really become politically driven. There's a lot of dysfunction. There's a lot of going back and forth. And I want to change that.
Mr. Lee?
So while I agree that the auditor's office authority is to be a check and balance on county spending specifically, the authority of the office rests with the statutes that outline what the authority of the office is. Now, that authority, much like any governmental office, is not unlimited, and it is on borrowed time and borrowed power from the people. I think that what ends up happening is people forget that the auditor's office is an elected position. And ultimately, whatever position you do or don't take, whatever the recommendation you do or don't make, has to be in the best interest of your constituency, which are the citizens of Kankakee County.
Thank you. Mr. Rubel, you have the next question, and it goes to Mr. Lee.
Please outline why you think the county auditor's office is or is not in accordance with state law.
So it goes back to the Office of Auditor, just for historic context, was created in 1964 in Kankakee County. That's when we passed the population threshold of 75,000 people. The office remained relatively untouched until 2003, when the then auditor, Mr. McCarty, who's now the finance director, went to the county board for the office to be separated. I believe that the county board, because the law states that the county board cannot alter the duties, powers, or functions of an elected office. And I believe that the board altered the duties, powers, and functions of that office. They continue to do so and have further impeded the office through the budget by not funding the office appropriately. And so you kind of have a dual issue as it relates to the office.
Mr. Meredith.
Could you repeat the question, please?
Please outline why you think the county auditor's office is or is not in accordance with state law?
The thing that's interesting about the law is it needs to be adjudicated in a court of law. That's why we have attorneys. Mr. Lee continues to say it's operating outside the law. I've learned one thing about the law. I'm not an attorney, but the law is ambiguous, and it needs to be decided in a court of law. The Attorney General has even weighed in on this because there is a case going on in Tazewell County, and they refuse to make any kind of determination on that until that case is settled. So to say we're operating outside the law, that's just an opinion. It's not a statement of fact.
Ms. Delabray, question to Mr. Meredith.
Mr. Meredith, since no candidate from the Democratic Party will run against you in the general election right now, this primary election will effectively determine our next county auditor. Can you tell me what kind of support you've gotten from other parties, Democrats or Libertarians or Independents?
Well, this is the primary, and my primary focus is on the Republican Party. I've reached out to Democrats and Libertarians, Independents. I talk to everyone. I'm not afraid to talk to anyone, and to make this a partisan type of an election, yes, it is a primary, and that's where partisan does play a part. The Democrats can still put somebody up against me when I win, so I welcome the opportunity to debate them as well.
Mr. Lee.
So obviously, as the incumbent, I represent all of Kankakee County, Republicans, Democrats, and Independents. My record shows that I work well across party lines and engaging our citizenry, and I will continue to do that. And if elected in this March primary, I will continue to do that in the general election as well.
Ms. Smith, you have the question, and the question is to Mr. Lee.
What skills do you bring to this office that distinguish you from your opponent?
Well, I think I bring a lot of skills. One is the skills I've attained as the incumbent, specifically in government operations, government finance, and accounting. I bring skills of leadership, skills of communication, and being able to engage people who I don't necessarily agree with. It's a different story when they don't want to engage you, but I'm willing to, and I can engage people who I don't agree with. I bring skills of leadership, attention to detail. I am very good at Excel. Just look at some of my reports online. Those are all Excel documents. So I bring a lot of that to the table.
Mr. Meredith.
I have 27 years of business experience. I've been an accountant for over 20. I hold a CPA. I have for 10 years. I have my own accounting practice that I started from the ground up. That distinguishes me because it shows that I have the leadership to bring people in. They seek out my advice as a financial professional. And as far as Mr. Lee's concerned, I've went through his reports. He might be good at Excel, but I'm not so sure he's good at accounting.
Mr. Rubel, you have the next question, and the question is to Mr. Meredith.
This discord involving this office, how much does it concern you as well as the health of the local GOP?
What's going on right now is absolutely ridiculous. If you can't communicate to board members, and especially your own party, where's that heading? This dysfunction that I've seen so far, and the reason I got into this race, is because it doesn't seem to be fixable. The county board has reached out to Mr. Lee, and he hasn't been accommodating to them. I'm not saying that people should just go along. I know people are trying to say that, but you know what? You have to keep an open line of communication and remain professional when you are communicating with people.
Mr. Lee.
Well, I certainly would disagree with the fact that I've caused dysfunction. What my opponent calls dysfunction, I call accountability. Look, sometimes people don't like what it is that you have to say, and that's all right. The idea that I don't engage or I'm not willing to engage is, quite frankly, made up. The fact is that I have communicated very much with the county board, and I continue to do so. I substantiate all of my positions in email form, that they are free to read anything that I have that I've submitted to them in terms of information and explanations for my positions on things. So there is an open line of communication, always has been. Any board member is welcome to my office. And as far as the party goes, I've been a Republican, I am a Republican, and I think I hold the most conservative financial values up here.
Mr. Rubel, you have the next question, and the question is to Mr. Lee.
Should there be oversight of the county auditor's office, and by who?
Yes, there should be oversight. The statutes give us two forms of oversight already. We have a requirement for an external independent auditor to audit the county, and that's one form of oversight. That's technical oversight. And then there's budgetary oversight that the county board is responsible for. But then there's the third form of oversight, which I believe belongs to the people. That's the ultimate oversight, the referendum and the endorsement that the people will give, hopefully to me, on March 17th, will be the determination as to whether or not I am who they retain as their elected official.
Mr. Meredith.
Could you repeat that question, please?
Should there be oversight of the county auditor's office, and by who?
The oversight comes in two forms, and I think Jake and I agree on this. The first is the external audit. That continues to go on no matter what annually. The other one is for the people of the county. The people of the county need to decide what they want from their auditor. Do they want a professional, or do they want somebody that appears to be fresh out of college and not too sure about what they're doing? I've looked at these reports. The oversight as a citizen, looking at these reports, very, very sophomoric at best.
Ms. Delabray, and the question is to Mr. Meredith.
Mr. Meredith, what technological changes would you bring to the office?
Technology is a very expensive undertaking. Not only do you have to put infrastructure in place, you also have to have the people in order to do that. I know I watched a county board meeting where Mr. Lee brought somebody in, and at a cost of $25,000 to $45,000 a year, he said he liked it because he thought it was neat. Well, neat doesn't get the job done. We need something that functions properly, and we need to go out and search for those types of solutions. I'm not an IT guy, but I'd be definitely want to work with the IT department to make sure we do have an efficient system.
Mr. Lee.
I think technology is the way of the future. There are many processes that we can create efficiencies through technology. One example would be doc flow, in which we can issue POs in our accounts payable process and hyperlink them to the actual source documents so that they're easy to find, and then upload that information to the internet so that the source receipts are searchable by the taxpayers. I embrace technology. I think that technology supports us. I think the simplistic commentary that I thought it was neat is a gross understatement. I thought that technology will bring much needed efficiency into county government. It has nothing to do with it being neat. It has to do with efficiency, which I think is what this office is about.
You said it, not me.
Ms. Smith, you have the question and questions to Mr. Lee.
LaSalle County Board will consider referendum to eliminate auditor's post. What's your thoughts?
Well, the voters can abolish an elected office at any time. And, of course, the board has the authority to put the question on the ballot. So to the extent that they are doing that, that is well within their rights. and the people of LaSalle County will make that decision. Now, obviously, I'm a proponent of the auditor's office, and so I don't want to see another auditor's office disappear. Lake County eliminated their auditor's office in the 80s, and the biggest corruption scandal in recent history has happened from the county board chairman to the county administrator and others in Lake County, and there is no elected auditor there. So obviously I am a proponent of the auditor's office.
Mr. Meredith.
LaSalle County, Lake County, this is Kankakee County. Let's talk about Kankakee County. The problem that I see with the auditor's office, the way it functions under the current statute, is independence. How can you give a valid opinion auditing your own work? So the law fails on its face just because the independence is compromised if the auditor is doing both the auditing and the day-to-day accounting. So as far as abolishing the auditor's office, that's for somebody else to decide, not me.
It's a question from the audience, and it's sort of in line with the previous question. And it talks about stressing the need being accountable to the taxpayers. So what would be your response, Mr. Mayor, to this particular question?
Could you repeat that, Theo?
It says the Kankakee County auditor stressed the need to be accountable to the taxpayers. So this question is sort of in line with the previous question.
Okay. As far as accountability, yes, by the nature of the work the auditor does, they are holding people accountable. How you go about that is kind of a difference between me and Jake. I would go in initially and discuss everything with all the department heads to see what's going on first, and then I can derive solutions from there. You can't be accountable if you don't go out and see the different departments, know what they're doing before you start making decisions. You can't make an arbitrary decision without actually reviewing it or setting up procedures to do that.
Mr. Lee.
So accountability to the people is the ultimate standard, I think, of an elected official, specifically the auditor. As it relates to engaging other departments, I have done that. I have visited just about every department in our county. Some we haven't been able to for various reasons, mainly scheduling on the part of that department. And to the extent that we make our decisions, it is based on policies that do exist already, and it is based on procedures and so forth that do exist. We do have some departments that help us develop their policies and procedures. We do that as well, and I think that's part of that accountability piece also.
Thank you. Mr. Arubo, you have the question and questions to Mr. Lee.
It has been expressed by some that certain accounting duties have not been performed recently. Please explain your thoughts on that.
Yes. So basically what happened was you had the administration say that we're not breaking the law and then pursue to change the law through House Bill 3680, which failed, and then interpret the law and create a fiscal policy that defined what my job should be. But in that, they reserved the control of the accounting system and the ability to allow anyone to enter information in that system. And due to the fact that there has been a case at least, when an entry was changed prior to posting to the general ledger, and the individual who made the initial entry didn't even know it was changed, my chief deputy and I felt that created too much risk for us, and we were not willing to enter data in a software that was controlled by the administration.
Mr. Meredith.
Mr. Rubel, could you repeat that question, please?
It has been expressed by some that certain accounting duties have not been performed recently. Please explain your thoughts on that issue.
I think the accounting duties are being performed. Whether or not it's outside of Jake's realm of responsibility, I guess is really the question. From my understanding, the county board reached out, changed the policy in hopes to be more compliant with the law. Mr. Lee flat out refused to do entries when he was asked a direct question. So now nobody knows who's supposed to be doing this. And what we run the risk of is vendors not getting paid, possible loss to a bond rating if certain items don't get paid.
Thank you. Ms. Delabrie, you have the question and questions to Mr. Meredith.
Mr. Meredith, is it realistic to think that bills will not be paid?
Sure, it's realistic that they won't get paid. The process is that the county board has to approve the bills. If no one's entering the bills, then how do they get paid? We're just supposed to magically cut checks? That's not the way it works. And bills do run the risk of not getting paid if they're not approved by the county board.
Mr. Lee?
Yes, I think Mr. Meredith is correct that the county board is responsible for paying the bills. And so the bills will always get paid. And right now they have assumed among themselves the duty of entering the bills into the accounting software as part of the accounting functions. So the bills have never been in jeopardy of not being paid. The imaginative description that we're going to lose a bond rating and all of that is just a fear tactic, and that is not going to happen. It has not happened, and it just won't happen. The county board won't allow it to happen.
Pay a bondholder one day late and see what happens.
Mr. Lee, you can respond. Anything else?
No, I don't think I have anything else.
Okay. Is a question from the audience, and I'm going to do my best here. You both stated, speak about communication, teamwork, and partisanship. Additionally, you have spoken about oversight of the community, yet here over the past several weeks and on social network, the attack on candidates have been just the opposite. How can you assure, as auditor, you will work for everyone and not fight for some?
Is that my question?
Yes.
Okay. So social media has a way of just getting away from people. I stick with a central message, and the central message is that the auditor's office belongs to the people, and I intend to return it to the people as it was designed. I think my opponent and I are philosophically different on that point. He thinks the office should be whatever it is that he thinks it should be. But I also believe that the accountability factor that the office brings to county government is sometimes going to make people uncomfortable. For anyone who may be an advocate of mine, who is overzealous in their support, that is not something I control. I can only control my message that comes directly from my Facebook and my social media accounts, and that's what I do.
Thank you. Mr. Meredith.
Social media is the root of all evil, but a necessary one. What we're talking about here is collaboration. And what my social media page showed was something that doesn't even come close to collaboration. We had the county board chairman ask Mr. Lee a direct question if he would share something about legal opinions. He flat out refused not to give it to the board. He flat out refused to give it to him. Now you tell me how that is collaboration.
Thank you. Ms. Delabrie, you have the next question. Ms. Smith, you have the next question to Mr. Meredith.
How would you describe the process of the auditor's office? Can you take me through a typical workday?
Typical workday in the auditor's office? Well, it depends what you're doing. The auditor's office has several things that it's required to do. And the funny part is a lot of it isn't getting done. The budget's controlled by the board, so the elected officials are the ones who determine who gets the money. They're supposed to be approving all orders for supplies prior to them being ordered. Not sure if that's happening. They want to maintain files of all contracts of the auditor's office. As far as transparency, I don't know where that's at. Maybe contracts should be out of the public eye. But they're supposed to report quarterly, but as well. But they need to audit ongoing the operations of the county, and that doesn't seem to be getting done.
Mr. Lee.
Well, the reason Mr. Meredith can't bring you through the auditor's office is he doesn't know. He doesn't have any experience in that area. I am the elected official, I'm the incumbent, and I can tell you that the auditor's office, with 2 people, functions quite well. We have been able to perform more internal audit reports, which are special project audits, than we've seen the office perform in the past 2 decades. We continuously audit the operations of the county, and that's why you hear some of the hubbub you may hear, because people don't want to see you auditing all the time. As far as the quarterly reports go, we do those all the time. We enhance those quarterly reports so well that we constantly get people to comment on how well the reports now look, the information that we present, the content that we have put on the website is, I would argue, second to none in our auditing world.
Thank you. Mr. Rubel, you have the next question, and the question is to Mr. Lee.
Here's a question from the audience. We, the residents of Kankakee County, expect our auditor to provide meaningful oversight of the government's expenses and financial practices. What experiences have you had that demonstrate your ability to perform this oversight? Also, please comment on your opponent's history and trade record at performing these duties.
Well, during my time as the auditor, we've had a lot of examples of oversight, specifically with spending. We'll give you an example. We had a situation where someone traveled to a conference and overspent the allowable reimbursements. We provided that oversight and provided recommendations against that reimbursement. There have been upgrades to room upgrades and room service and Corner Kings and vehicles and things like that. We've provided that oversight and recommended against those expenditures. Unfortunately, in many of those cases, the county board decided to approve them anyway, but at least we were a voice for the people as to how their tax dollars were being spent. As to my opponent's history in that regard, I really don't know much about his history. I don't know where he's provided any such oversight. I do know that he's tried to present himself as the whistleblower at the Kankakee Valley Park District, but through FOIAs of the district and the ISP, there is no evidence to support that claim.
Mr. Meredith.
I'll give you an example of my oversight. After I left the Park District, I went to work for one of the top accounting firms in the state of Illinois that handles government accounting. My first task, I went to a nonprofit organization that managed the Head Start program and received money from Health and Human Services for about $100 million. My work for the first 30 days that I was there, I audited 32 different Head Start programs. And guess what I found? Fraud, malfeasance, wasteful spending. Guess what happened? Health and Human Services pulled the contract from them and brought in somebody else to do the job. That's the kind of work I do.
We have it's a question from the audience. What is your opinion as auditor not being given full access to the books and records of the county? Mr. Meredith.
I haven't heard that he hasn't received full access to the records. Pretty simple. Get in the elevator, go downstairs, and speak to Mr. McCarty. He's the finance director. He has it. I don't know what the problem is there.
Mr. Lee.
Yeah, so we have the ability to see what's in the centralized accounting software. So I'm not sure what that question is really getting at, but so what we do see and have access to, we definitely are able to use.
Ms. Dallabray, you have the questions to Mr. Lee.
Mr. Lee, how would you weed out waste?
So there's always waste, just fundamentally. There's always waste for improvement. From the auditor standpoint, we really have no authority to weed it out, but we can call attention to it. An example of that would be when we were paying for a software we were not using. And there was a contract that needed to be renegotiated that Chairman Wheeler, myself, and the state's attorney worked on that saved the county $29,000, almost $30,000. So there's always opportunities to weed out waste, and we have proven the ability to do so over the past 3 years.
Mr. Meredith?
Mr. Lee, you tout that you've saved the county $100,000. That's very commendable. That's out of $250 million worth of claims. Last time I checked the math, that's about 99.96% of the bills that have come through that seem to be not wasteful. So as far as waste needs to be found by going in and reviewing everything with the department heads, and I don't see that being done at this time.
Ms. Smith, you have the next question, and it's to Mr. Meredith.
This is a question from the audience. Mm-hmm. What are your credentials which qualify you for the office of auditor?
I've been in private practice now, my own private practice, for about 9 years. I've worked for a healthcare system where I managed 50 physician practices. I worked in a public accounting firm, which I said earlier. I also did pension accounting there. I worked for the Kankakee Valley Park District, where I was the finance director, where I received unqualified opinions for all my work. That's where I have the experience to do the job.
Thank you. Mr. Lee.
So obviously I have my time as the incumbent, developing experience there. I'm on the finance committee of Riverside Health System. I hold several degrees, bachelor's degree in accounting, business administration, and the MBA. I also would like to point out that not only is the office of auditor an elected position, which means that there are no credentials required, like you don't have to have a Series 7 to be the county treasurer, and the county treasurer doesn't have such a credential either. You have to be able to put the right people in place. And my chief deputy is a CPA, and hopefully if the county board becomes compliant and we get a budget to fund the office, we'll add other staff with a certified internal auditor, certified fraud examiner, different credentials like that. I am very big on continual education and credentials, and I would like to see more of those happen around the county.
Mr. Meredith? Or did you answer that already?
I already answered that one.
Mr. Ruber, you have the question to Mr. Lee.
If elected or re-elected, how would you address another elected official's problem if they ask you to look into a situation?
Yes, so we've never rejected any elected official who asked us to look into anything. As a matter of fact, one of the elected officials who we did an audit on one of the funds that they control, we recommended that they actually reconcile their accounts, and that had not happened. There was also a situation where in the accounting software there's a code called suspense, and that would be transactions would be placed in suspense to force balance those accounts, and we recommended against that practice as well. And some of those items were being evaluated by the external auditors as well in that particular circumstance. So we have never rejected an elected official or not done work with elected officials to get things in place in their offices, but ultimately it's up to that elected official to run their office appropriately. And if they choose to follow our recommendations or not, that's their prerogative.
Mr. Meredith?
It's my understanding that Mr. Lee knew about the animal control issue and the bank reconciliation problem for over 3 years. The treasurer asked him about it. He did nothing about it. When the sheriff asked him if he could finish an audit, he said he was too busy or didn't have time. So as far as that, I don't know why you would be saying that you've been working with elected officials when you turn those two down flat.
Ms. Delaware?
May I, since that was kind of a direct response, may I respond to that? A direct attack,
We
basically?
will give you
Okay.
a time to respond,
Okay.
and Mr. Meredith will give you an opportunity to respond to comment. Mr. Lee? We'll give you a minute.
Okay.
And
So with the most recent...
you want to respond?
Yeah, I would like to respond
and we'll
to
give Mr. Meredith to respond
Sure.
also.
Because to say that there was no animal control audit is absolutely false. The audit is available on my website and has been posted on social media as well. We did not turn down the sheriff or the treasurer or anyone else. Those statements have no basis in reality. You can go to the website and read those reports. There are over 14 recommendations to improve the operations and the financial reporting in that particular fund.
Mr. Meredith?
I'd tell everybody in the audience just to watch video and read the report.
Thank you. Ms. Delaware, you have the question, and the question is to Mr. Meredith.
Mr. Meredith, in the midst of all this arguments in the county board, how can one begin collaborating with the board effectively and gain the trust of the taxpayer?
Communication is the key to it. Communicating to people is not talking down to them. It's not attacking them. What I've seen are attacks. And so much so, it's created dysfunction. Again, I don't think this can be remedied without a change. And it either has to come from the elected official or someone like me needs to step in and make that change.
Mr. Lee?
So one of the things I would say about communication is, and so-called dysfunction and attacks is, I would remind my opponent that there was an illegal meeting in July of 2017. That meeting violated the Open Meetings Act, thus illegal. And there you had your county board chairman attacking me, attacking my character in that meeting, and they were forced to publish the minutes, which are available on the county's website. And so is the audio. The power went out, so only 7 minutes and so of the audio is available from over an hour-long meeting. So to try to point the finger, so to say, at the auditor's office as if we have caused the so-called dysfunction is disingenuous. Our office is willing to communicate. We are still, even after an illegal meeting, willing to come to the table. We have come to the table. It is the other party that has backed away from any type of negotiations.
Thank you. Ms. Smith, you have the question and questions to Mr. Lee.
Could you describe for us your approachability personality? Are you approachable?
I would like to think that I'm approachable. I have constituents come into my office all the time. I have county board members come into my office all the time. And anyone can talk to me about anything. The thing that I pride myself in is that I'm willing to hear people critique and criticize I may not agree with it, I may not like it, but I'm willing to listen. It doesn't always get reciprocated, but that's okay. But I am definitely approachable, and I think anyone who knows me would say the same.
Mr. Meredith.
I think I'm a pretty approachable guy. I've got over 400 clients. I've got dozens of business owners that seek my advice on a daily basis.
Thank you. Mr. Ruby, you have the question, and the question is to Mr. Meredith.
Ronald Reagan said the 11th Amendment was, do not speak ill will toward another Republican. Will you actively support your opponent should they win against a possible Democratic challenger?
I'd really have to take that into consideration. What I'm seeing is the work isn't getting done in the auditor's office right now. I want somebody in there for the county who's going to do the work, regardless of their party affiliation.
Mr. Lee.
You know, I kind of chuckle at that because I was tempted to say yes. But, I have to agree, though, it is about the person, or it's about the purpose and not the person. So if you do have someone, for example, a lot of my Republican colleagues support our state's attorney, who is not a Republican. So it's really about the person or about the purpose and being able to put your support behind a purpose. So,
Ms. Delabrae, question to Mr. Lee.
Mr. Lee, how can you make some suggestions to improve spending patterns at various county offices?
How can you make suggestions to improve them?
Excuse me. Do you have any suggestions to improve spending patterns at various offices?
Well, let me take out my there's always suggestions to improve spending habits. I tend to walk a careful line not to come off like I'm trying to tell someone how to run their department, but especially the things that come across our desk that we don't think are in line with proper spending, we can't substantiate is a contract item, particularly equipment and clothing and things like that. So we provide those recommendations to county officials already. Anything beyond that, when we do our internal audits, our standalone internal audits, not our continual internal audit procedures, because we're doing that all the time, our standalone audits do provide recommendations to those elected officials. And, like I said, sometimes they take them on board, sometimes they don't.
Mr. Meredith.
Could you repeat that question again?
Do you have any suggestions on spending patterns for various county offices?
The spending patterns, it's going to have to be looked at a little more in depth. I don't have the luxury of Mr. Lee, who's the incumbent, who's able to go in and take a look at what's really going on. I'm the type of person who's going to look for bigger things. I'm not worried about someone that drives an extra or saves an extra 2 miles by driving 10 minutes out of their way. Those are the types of things that we're seeing now. What I want to look for are bigger items that really can provide savings to the taxpayer.
Thank you. Ms. Smith, you have the question. The question is to Mr. Meredith.
What are your plans for Kankakee County as the auditor to help save taxpayers' dollars or to ensure that taxpayer dollars are handled appropriately?
As far as that, I would want to sit down and discuss things in my reports with the county board. They're the ones that make the ultimate budget decision. So as far as picking out certain line items, we'd have to sit down and discuss that.
Mr. Lee.
There's a simple phrase I use: every cent counts. And our office is committed to protecting the taxpayers down to the penny. And there are people who will make fun of me for doing that, but we do it. And we do it because it works and it saves. We can point to thousands of dollars that we have ultimately saved the taxpayers by watching every transaction down to the penny, and that's what we'll continue to do.
Thank you. Mr. Rubel, you have the next question, and it's to Mr. Lee.
If elected or re-elected, how would you better collaborate with members of the county board?
Well, again, as I've said in the past, I am willing now, as I always have been, to collaborate. What that collaboration looks like, obviously, is up to the parties to decide. I have sat at the table of collaboration, willingly so. I have provided every piece of information that has been asked of me, even with the most recent mediation attempt that took place. So this notion that I'm not willing to collaborate is just simply false. I have been willing, I am willing, and whatever we can do for the auditor's office and the county board, specifically the administration, to move forward and continue the progress that the county has been able to manifest, we will do that.
Mr. Meredith.
Collaboration is about bringing people together. I don't know how anyone thinks that you can do that by being combative. Sometimes you have to take a little humble pie when you go into a negotiation. It always isn't my way or the highway, and that's what I've been seeing from the auditor's office right now.
Thank you. Ms. Smith, questions to Mr. Meredith.
What changes, if any, would you make to the office going forward? Now, I know earlier the question was asked as far as in terms of technology changes, but outside of that, what changes, if any, would you bring?
What changes would I make to the auditor's office is the question.
Yeah.
Well, I would have to say my administration would handle things much differently. Again, the first thing I would do is sit down with each and every department head to make sure I know what's going on as far as the financial operations. I would start there. From there, I would go on and try to bring in policies and recommendations that would improve things. After that, I would continue on and to develop an audit program that annually is consistent throughout the county for every department. Right now, the auditor has provided 7 audit reports over a 3-year period. And if that's continually auditing, boy, I'm going to have an easy job.
Mr. Lee.
Well, I think the first change I would make is to get the county compliant with the law as it relates to the auditor's office. That's probably the biggest change that I would make, and adequately fund the office. Beyond that, I think that there's always room for improvement as it relates to the activities that we engage in. In addition to the continuous internal audits that are required by the auditor statute, the auditor is required to audit other funds as well in other statutes. And so you have to know that, and that's part of why our standalone independent audit reports that are available online, and they try to minimize it like 7. Well, the office produced 0 before me. So with 2 people, we've increased it by 700%, basically. So to the extent that we are able to do that more, those independent audit reports, we will do them more.
We've talked about oversight, the process of the office, and then there's a number of questions about whether or not the position should be, which is full-time, and it's just an array of questions. But one of the questions that's sticking out from this particular question, and Mr. Meredith, you would have an opportunity to rebuttal. Mr. Lee, you just mentioned the law. And can you elaborate on your thoughts of what should the law be? And Mr. Meredith, you can rebuttal his comment.
Yeah, I think the law is fine as it is. It's when people attempt to insert things that are not there. My opponent will say that the Attorney General refuses to respond. No, what the Attorney General refuses to respond on is a letter the county sent the Attorney General in April of 2017. The Attorney General, as an office, has already opined on this issue. That's a public record. And the issue is that the county board cannot delegate duties prescribed to the auditor to any other officer, be it appointed or elected. And that has happened, and that continues to be the situation. So I think that we need to come into compliance with what should be, not what we want it to be.
Thank you. You have 50 seconds, Mr. Meredith, to rebuttal regarding.
Well, I'm a CPA and I am no attorney, so I leave the decisions about the law up to the courts. The Attorney General did not want to opine on this particular situation because it was moving through the court system. So I don't know why we keep on going through this litany of what Mr. Lee thinks, because it's obviously conflicting with what the board thinks and the policies they put into place. Now, we're going to get a ruling out of Tazewell County eventually, but until then, we're going to have to continue on and make sure that the work is being done, and I'm just not seeing that.
On behalf of the Kankakee County branch of the NACP, we're asking everyone to vote on Tuesday, March 17th to the respective candidate, 17th. And again, we want to thank the candidates for taking time out of their busy schedule. And we definitely want to thank Ms. Smith, Mr. Rubel, and Ms. Delabray for being the panelists for this evening, and our timer, Ms. Paulette Crank. And we're going to go into the closing statement, starting with you, Mr. Meredith, followed by Mr. Lee. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pace. The Office of the Auditor is entrusted by the taxpayer to provide an added level of scrutiny to the financial operations of the county. It must resist the urge of putting its own political aspirations in front of the best interests of the county. It must constantly remain independent, objective, and free from bias, or its opinion will be rendered worthless. Unfortunately, the opinion has already been rendered worthless by the Finance Committee, as it's rejected the reports from the Auditor's Office twice in the last 3 months. Its work has been insufficient, offers little value to the financial matters of the county. The county has regained its financial footing and should be commended for its efforts, not torn down. Instead, the Auditor's Office has used it as a soapbox to shout out untruths about law-breaking, corruption, before any court has even rendered a verdict on the issue. It's reckless and completely unethical. It needs to end. And it will end by voting for Brandon Meredith on March 17th. A true professional, not a politician. And remember, I already gave an arm for the county, and I'm willing to give the leg too.
Thank you. Mr. Lee.
Well, thank you to the NAACP and to all of you who took the time to come out and listen to our perspectives on this important issue. The Office of the Auditor does belong to the taxpayers, and I have faithfully executed those duties to the best of my ability, given the restrictions that have been placed on the office over the years. The independence comment that has been made is one that I strongly support and I strongly believe in. However, my opponent cannot be independent. The people who he would presumably audit is endorsing him and supporting his campaign. So his independence is impaired from the outset. I stand with the people, and the people are the ones who will endorse me on March 17th in the Republican primary. So I hope that you have strongfully and thoughtfully considered the items that you've heard today and that you've looked at the past 3 years of my performance in the auditor's office and my commitment to the taxpayers and watching every cent of your hard-earned money over the time I've been there. I've done what I could, and I will continue to do more if given the opportunity on March 17th when you vote for Jake Lee. Thank you so much for the opportunity to serve you as your elected auditor, and I thank you for being here tonight. God bless.
Thank you, everyone. Drive safe. Thank you.